The sound of shattering glass cut through the afternoon chatter at Tony's diner. Two men burst through the entrance, their movements frantic and desperate. The first man wore a black ski mask, his hand trembling as he brandished a small pistol. The second followed close behind, face obscured by the hood of a gray sweatshirt pulled low. "Nobody move!" The masked man's voice cracked with panic. "Empty the register now." Time seemed to crystallize. The clatter of silverware against plates ceased. Conversations died mid-sentence. A heavy-set truck driver at the counter slowly raised his hands. A college student dropped his textbook with a thud. In a corner booth, an elderly woman began to hyperventilate, her thin shoulders shaking with terror. The atmosphere transformed from comfortable routine to primal fear in seconds. All except for one person. Rachel Carter stood perfectly still halfway between the kitchen and the dining area, a stack of plates balanced in her hands. The 32-year-old waitress assessed the situation with a strange clinical detachment. Her dark eyes tracked the gunman's erratic movements, noting the way his finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger. She registered the second man's nervous glances toward the door, planning an escape route. Most importantly, she spotted the elderly customer, Mrs. Wilkins, whose labored breathing suggested an imminent panic attack. From the darkest corner of the diner, Victor Morgan observed the scene with the calculated precision of a chess grandmaster. The 58-year-old CEO of Morgan Capital sat motionless, his weathered face betraying no emotion. While other patrons fixed their eyes on the gun, Victor studied the waitress. Her composure amid chaos was extraordinary. There was no blind courage in her stance, only a rare, controlled competence that he had seen in only a handful of people throughout his life. The masked gunman swung his weapon toward Rachel. "You on the ground now." Rachel carefully placed the stack of plates on the nearest emptiest table. The gentle clink of ceramic against formica seemed unnaturally loud in the silent diner. She raised her hands slowly, palms open. "It's okay," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Everyone stay calm. Tony is getting the money." Her eyes met the gunman's wild stare. "Sir, we don't want any trouble. You'll get what you came for." The elderly woman, Mrs. Wilkins, began to sob uncontrollably. The gunman's head whipped toward the sound, his panic visibly escalating. "Shut her up, or I swear to God." "Mrs. Wilkins." Rachel never took her eyes off the gunman, but directed her words to the woman. "Look at me. Take a deep breath, like we practiced, for your blood pressure. Remember, in through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it." The gentle authority in Rachel's voice seemed to affect everyone in the room. Mrs. Wilkins' sobbing quieted. The gunman's stance softened slightly. Behind the counter, Tony, the diner's owner, was stuffing bills into a canvas bag with trembling hands. "It's ready," Tony called out, his voice breaking. "Just take it and go, please." The hooded accomplice snatched the bag. "Let's go now." As they backed toward the door, the masked gunman's eyes met Rachel's one final time. Something flickered across his gaze, recognition, confusion, perhaps even shame, before he turned and fled with his partner. The diner erupted into chaos once more, this time with relief, fear, and shock. People rushed to lock the door. Tony collapsed onto a stool, his face ashen. Mrs. Wilkins wailed. And through it all, Rachel moved with purpose. She went first to Mrs. Wilkins, kneeling beside her booth, speaking in low, reassuring tones. She checked on the college student, the truck driver moving through the diner like a nurse making rounds. Victor Morgan remained in his corner booth, watching this remarkable display of crisis management. He had witnessed CEOs crumble under less pressure during hostile takeovers. He had seen politicians stammer and sweat facing far less dangerous situations. Yet this waitress, earning minimum wage in a modest diner, had faced a loaded gun with more tactical grace than most trained professionals. She hadn't been recklessly brave. She had been strategic. She had controlled the emotional temperature of the room, preventing panic from triggering violence. It was an astonishing display of what he valued most: grace under fire. The police arrived eventually, their sirens, a belated announcement of safety. Statements were taken. The adrenaline slowly subsided into a procedural hum. Rachel, her face now pale with delayed shock, resumed her duties with remarkable professionalism. She brought the check to Victor's table. Her hand trembled slightly as the reaction she had suppressed finally began to surface. "I'm so sorry about that, sir," she said, her voice a little hoarse. "Your meal is on the house, of course." Victor looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the fatigue etched beneath her eyes, the slight fraying at the cuffs of her uniform, and beneath it all, an unshakable core of resilience. He reached into his wallet and removed a stack of $100 bills. He counted out 100 of them, $10,000, and placed them on the table alongside his business card. The stark white rectangle contained only his name and a private phone number that fewer than 10 people in the world possessed. That wasn't fearlessness, he said, his voice low and graveled by decades of command. That was management. Very impressive. Before Rachel could respond, Victor stood and walked out, leaving behind a sum that could change her immediate circumstances and a small white card that held the power to change her entire life. The world Victor Morgan returned to was as far removed from Tony's diner as Earth from Mars. His chauffeur held the door of the Bentley Mulsanne, its midnight blue exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun. Victor settled into the leather seat, breathing in the familiar scent of power and isolation. "Home, sir?" his driver asked. "The office," Victor replied, his mind still replaying the scene at the diner. Morgan Tower dominated the Boston skyline, 78 stories of glass and steel that housed the headquarters of Morgan Capital. As the elevator ascended to the top floor, Victor considered the empire he had built over 30 years. $17 billion in managed assets, real estate developments across 3 continents, a reputation for ruthless efficiency that had earned him the nickname the Predator of Wall Street. And yet, as he entered his corner office with its panoramic view of Boston Harbor, Victor felt the familiar emptiness that had become his constant companion since Eleanor's death 5 years ago. He moved to the bar and poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25, swirling the amber liquid as he gazed at the photograph on his desk. Eleanor Morgan captured in morning light on their yacht, laughing at something he had said. The photograph preserved a moment of joy that cancer had stolen along with everything else that mattered. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Morgan, the London office is calling about the Harrington proposal." "Tell them I'll call back tomorrow," Victor said, turning to face the city stretching below. His mind drifted back to the waitress, Rachel Carter. There had been something in her competence that reminded him of Eleanor, the same calm efficiency, the same ability to read a room. Eleanor had been his moral compass, his connection to humanity. Without her, Morgan Capital had become even more profitable and considerably less scrupulous. Victor wondered if Rachel would call. Most people would take the money and run, but he suspected she wasn't most people. 3 miles away in a small apartment in Dorchester, Rachel Carter stared at the stack of $100 bills on her kitchen table. $10,000. The sum represented freedom from immediate financial pressure. Lily's medication for the next 2 months, rent paid ahead, perhaps even catching up on the electricity bill that had been hovering in the danger zone. Her hands still trembled slightly as she picked up the business card. Victor Morgan. The name had seemed vaguely familiar at the diner, but after an internet search, Rachel understood why. Forbes profiles, Wall Street Journal features, the Midas of Manhattan, who had relocated his operation to Boston following his wife's death. A titan known for dismantling companies with surgical precision, extracting maximum value regardless of human cost. "What are you looking at?" Lily's voice broke through Rachel's thoughts. Rachel quickly set down the card. Her 12-year-old sister stood in the doorway of their small kitchen, oxygen cannula in place, curious eyes taking in the unusual scene. "Nothing important," Rachel said, moving to tuck away the money. "That doesn't look like nothing," Lily said, approaching the table. Despite the cystic fibrosis that restricted her lung capacity, Lily's mind remained sharp and inquisitive. "That's a lot of money. And who's Victor Morgan?" Rachel sighed. She never lied to Lily. They had promised each other honesty after their parents' death. "There was a robbery at the diner today." Lily's eyes widened with alarm. "Everyone's fine," Rachel quickly added. "No one was hurt. This customer, he left this tip and his card afterward." $10,000 as a tip. Lily's voice rose in disbelief. "Is he crazy or just super rich?" "Both probably," Rachel said with a small smile. "He's some big-shot investment guy." Lily picked up the business card, examining it. "Are you going to call him?" "I don't know." Rachel ran her fingers through her dark hair. "It feels complicated." "Because of the money?" Lily asked. "Partly," Rachel admitted, "but also because of something he said about how I handled the situation." Rachel hadn't told anyone about the moment during nursing school when she had saved a patient during her ER rotation. A man in cardiac arrest, the attending physician momentarily absent, and Rachel stepping forward without hesitation, administering CPR with textbook precision, calmly directing others until the doctor arrived. The attending had pulled her aside afterward. Most people freeze in crisis, he had said. Some react usually badly. Very few respond with the right actions in the right sequence. You can't teach that instinct, Carter. It's something you either have or you don't. That same instinct had taken over in the diner today, and somehow Victor Morgan had recognized it. The next morning, Rachel's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. Her shift at the diner started at 6, just as it had 6 days a week for the past 2 years. She moved quietly, careful not to wake Lily, whose sleep was precious and often disturbed by coughing fits. The morning rush at Tony's diner proceeded with a forced normality. Tony had installed a new security camera and kept glancing nervously at the door. The regular customers expressed concern about the robbery, but life moved on. Only Mrs. Wilkins was absent from her usual booth. During her break, Rachel found herself returning to the internet search she had begun the night before. Victor Morgan's story was the quintessential American narrative of self-made success, albeit with sharper edges than most. Born to a plumber in South Boston, he had enlisted in the Marines straight out of high school. After serving in Operation Desert Storm, he had used his military discipline to build a financial empire. What caught Rachel's attention was a detail about his personal life. Victor's only son, Michael, had publicly severed ties with his father 3 years ago, following a dispute over the direction of Morgan Capital. The younger Morgan had advocated for more sustainable investments. The elder had prioritized profit regardless of environmental impact. The business world had watched their relationship disintegrate in real time. Now Victor Morgan was approaching 60, widowed, estranged from his only child, and reportedly more ruthless than ever. Why would such a man take notice of a waitress in a modest diner? What could he possibly want from her? The answer came to Rachel as she administered Lily's evening treatment. The nebulizer hummed, filling the air with medicated mist as Lily breathed deeply, a well-practiced routine. "You should call him," Lily said between breaths, the conversation from the previous night apparently still on her mind. "It's not that simple, Lil." "Why not? The worst he can say is he made a mistake, and then we still have the $10,000. Lily's practical wisdom often belied her age. "And what if it's not a mistake?" Rachel countered. "What if it's something inappropriate?" The possibility had crossed her mind more than once. Lily rolled her eyes. "Then you hang up. But what if it's something good? What if it's a real opportunity?" Rachel thought about the nursing degree she had abandoned 1 semester short of completion when their parents died and Lily's condition worsened. She thought about the medical bills that accumulated faster than she could pay them. She thought about the clinical trial at Boston Children's Hospital that could potentially transform Lily's prognosis if only they could afford the co-pays not covered by their bare-bones insurance. "Maybe you're right," Rachel conceded. After Lily had fallen asleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the business card propped against a salt shaker. Her finger hovered over her phone. What did she have to lose beyond her pride? And pride didn't pay for enzyme replacement therapy. She dialed the number. She expected a secretary, an automated menu, a gatekeeper of some kind. Instead, a man answered on the second ring. "Morgan." The voice was brusque, a statement rather than a greeting. Rachel's throat tightened. "Mr. Morgan, this is Rachel Carter from Tony's Diner from the robbery the other day." There was a pause. Rachel could almost feel him assessing her through the phone line. "Ms. Carter, I was beginning to think my judgment had been flawed." "Your judgment? 4 days is not decisive. It suggests hesitation." Rachel bristled at his tone. 4 days is practical. I needed to ensure my family's immediate needs were addressed before considering a cryptic offer from a stranger. Another pause, longer this time. Rachel thought she detected the faintest trace of approval when he spoke again. "Fair enough. Morgan Tower. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late." The line went dead before Rachel could respond. She stared at her phone in disbelief. It hadn't been a request or an invitation. It had been a summons. The next morning, Rachel stood before the imposing glass facade of Morgan Tower, clutching a coffee that had long since gone cold. She wore her only interview outfit, a simple black skirt suit she had purchased for nursing school graduations that never happened. The morning sunlight reflected off the building's surface, creating an almost blinding glare. It seemed designed to intimidate, and it was succeeding. In the lobby, financial professionals streamed past her, absorbed in conversations about market openings and quarterly projections. Rachel approached the security desk, hyper-aware of how out of place she must appear. "I'm here to see Victor Morgan," she said, trying to project confidence. "Rachel Carter." The security guard looked skeptical until he checked his tablet. His expression changed to one of surprise. "Yes, Miss Carter, you're expected on the 78th floor." He handed her a visitor badge. "Express elevator on the right." The elevator ascended with unsettling speed. Each floor that disappeared below represented another level of separation from the world Rachel knew. By the time the doors opened onto the 78th floor, she had entered another realm entirely, one of hushed voices, expensive art, and the subtle scent of power. A sleek receptionist greeted her. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Morgan is expecting you." She led Rachel through a maze of glass-walled offices to an imposing set of double doors. Victor Morgan's office was less an office and more a statement of dominance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of Boston. The furnishings were minimal and modern, the desk a massive slab of polished walnut. The only personal touch was a single photograph in a silver frame, a woman with kind eyes and a confident smile, presumably the late Mrs. Morgan. Victor stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the city. He turned as Rachel entered, fixing her with an intense stare that seemed to catalog her every feature. "Ms. Carter, punctual, a good sign." In the harsh morning light, he looked older than he had in the diner. Deep lines etched his face, mapping decades of high-stakes decisions. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his charcoal suit custom-tailored to his tall, still powerful frame. "Please sit." He gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. Rachel sat acutely aware that this man's watch, a Patek Philippe, visible beneath his cuff, probably cost more than she earned in 2 years. "I don't waste time, Ms. Carter, so I'll be direct." He took his seat, folding his hands on the desk. The $10,000 was a thank you for the entertainment. "Entertainment?" Rachel echoed, her voice tight. "Watching you handle that situation was the most interesting thing I've seen all year," Victor said, leaning forward slightly. "You didn't panic. You assessed. You managed the threat. You controlled the environment." His eyes narrowed. "You have a rare ability, the capacity to remain absolutely clear-headed under extreme duress. I can teach someone financial modeling. I cannot teach them that." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Morgan, with all due respect, I'm a waitress. I dropped out of nursing school. I'm not qualified to work in a place like this." "Your nursing background is precisely why I'm interested," Victor countered. "You're trained to observe symptoms, make diagnoses, and perform triage under pressure. Business is no different. It's about identifying the illness in a deal, finding the pressure points, and knowing what to say first." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was an offer letter. The salary printed on it made Rachel's vision blur momentarily. $250,000 annually. Full medical benefits that would cover Lily's treatments. A signing bonus that could clear their medical debt. "This is," Rachel whispered, unable to complete the thought. "Your job will be to handle problems," Victor explained. "Sensitive situations, a difficult negotiation with a union representative, a community protest at a development site, a high-value client threatening to withdraw. You will be my eyes and ears. You will go into volatile environments and bring back stability. You will use the same skills you displayed in that diner observation, de-escalation management of human emotion." Rachel looked up from the letter, her mind racing. It was insane. A billionaire offering a waitress a position as his personal crisis manager based on a 10-minute interaction during a robbery. It defied logic. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You must have access to former FBI negotiators, crisis management professionals, people with actual qualifications." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "Those people are trained to follow protocols. You have instinct. There's a difference." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "There will be one condition: absolute loyalty, absolute discretion. What you see and hear in this company stays with you. You will be tested. Many people here will not understand my decision. They will see you as an interloper. They will try to make you fail." His voice lowered to a near whisper. "If you fail, you're gone." No second chances. Rachel remained seated, the offer letter clutched in her hand. Her mind was a tempest of contradictory thoughts. This was a world of predators, and she was decidedly prey. But predators bled like anyone else, and she knew how to handle bleeding. She looked from the letter to the sprawling city outside the window, a city that had always felt alien and hostile. For the first time, it looked like a possibility. "You don't need until the end of the day, Mr. Morgan," she said, finding that same calm, steady tone from the diner. "I accept." Victor Morgan allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Good. Your first test begins Monday." Rachel's first day at Morgan Capital arrived with the weight of inevitability. The 78th floor was a realm of quiet ambition, the air charged with the silent exchange of millions of dollars. Her own office, she had an office, was a glass-walled space near Victor's, a clear statement of her proximity to power. It was also a fishbowl, exposing her to the curious and often hostile gazes of her new colleagues. The whispers followed her immediately. "That's her, the waitress. I heard Morgan hired her on a whim. My cousin has an MBA from Wharton and couldn't even get an interview." Rachel ignored them. She had endured worse during her ER rotations in nursing school, where attending physicians had made sport of humiliating students. She spent the first day doing exactly what Victor had instructed: observe. She read every file she could access, studied the dynamics of meetings she attended silently from the corner, watched how people spoke and what they avoided saying. Her primary tormentor materialized on the second day. His name was James Harrington, Senior Executive Director of Morgan Capital. Tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her first car, and armed with a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes, James was the golden boy of the firm. He had graduated from Harvard, climbed the ranks with strategic precision, and clearly viewed Rachel as an insult to everything he had worked for. "Rachel, is it?" He leaned against her door frame without bothering to knock. "James Harrington, I oversee acquisitions and special projects." The words "special projects" carried a trace of mockery. "Just wanted to welcome you to the team." "Thank you, James." Rachel kept her tone even, not standing up. It was a small power play she had learned from dealing with difficult patients' family members. "I have to say," he continued, surveying her sparse office, "we're all fascinated by your unconventional hiring story. Victor certainly keeps us on our toes." He straightened his already perfect tie. "You were in food service, I understand." "I was a waitress," Rachel said, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm also a very fast learner." James chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Well, if you ever need help figuring out the difference between EBITDA and non-GAAP earnings, just let me know. Wouldn't want you to get overwhelmed." He sauntered away, leaving a trail of condescension in his wake. Rachel took a deep breath and returned to her research. James Harrington was a problem for another day. For now, she needed to understand this new world she had entered. What she couldn't know was that James was already plotting her downfall. In his corner office, he made a phone call to a private investigator named Carson, a man he had used before to dig up dirt on business rivals. "I need everything on a Rachel Carter," he instructed. "Former waitress at Tony's Diner in South Boston. Now working directly under Victor. Find something I can use." At the end of her first week, Rachel received a text message from Victor. "My office, 8 a.m. tomorrow, Riverside Towers project." Problem. Rachel had read the file on Riverside Towers, a massive luxury condominium development that Morgan Capital was building downtown. Construction was stalled because of a holdout, an elderly woman named Martha Sullivan, who refused to sell her brownstone, the last property on the block Morgan didn't control. James had been handling the negotiations and had failed spectacularly, turning what should have been a simple acquisition into a public relations problem. Saturday morning found Rachel in Victor's office as he briefed her on the situation. "Sullivan is 82 years old, widowed, no children. She's lived in that house for 50 years. We've offered her 3 times market value. Harrington's approach has been legal pressure and increasingly large checks. It's failing and creating negative press. The construction delay is costing us $200,000 every week." Victor fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Fix it. You have 48 hours." As Rachel left Victor's office, she passed James in the hallway. His face flushed with barely contained fury as he realized Victor had reassigned his project to the waitress. Rachel didn't go to the legal department. She didn't review the buyout offers. She went to the Boston Public Library and spent hours researching Martha Sullivan. She discovered that Mrs. Sullivan was a retired nurse who had served in Vietnam with the Army Nurse Corps. Her late husband, Robert Sullivan, had been a decorated Marine who died 15 years ago. The next day, Rachel arrived at Mrs. Sullivan's brownstone, carrying not legal documents, but a small box of specialty teas and a book about Vietnam War nurses she had found at a used bookstore. The brownstone was well maintained with flower boxes in the windows, a small island of history surrounded by construction equipment. She knocked on the door. It was opened by a small, white-haired woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that suggested she missed nothing. "If you're from Morgan Capital, you can turn right around and leave," Mrs. Sullivan said, her voice firm despite her age. "My name is Rachel Carter," Rachel said calmly. "I am from Morgan Capital, but I'm not here with another offer. I was hoping I could just talk with you for a few minutes." She held out the tea and book. "I read that you served as a nurse in Vietnam. My mother was a nurse too, not in the war, but she always had tremendous respect for those who served." Mrs. Sullivan's stern expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. She looked from Rachel's face to the gifts in her hands. After a long moment, she sighed and opened the door wider. "Well, I suppose I could use some company besides those lawyers," she said. "Come in." Inside, the brownstone was filled with memories, photographs covering the wall shelves lined with books and mementos. Rachel didn't mention Riverside Towers or Morgan Capital. Instead, she asked about the photos, listened as Mrs. Sullivan spoke about her husband, about her years treating wounded soldiers in field hospitals. Rachel shared stories of her own nursing training, of caring for her sister. 2 hours passed in conversation before Miss Sullivan herself brought up the elephant in the room. "You know why I won't leave, don't you?" she asked. "It's not about the money," Rachel said quietly. "Of course it's not about the money," Miss Sullivan scoffed. "Robert and I bought this house when he came back from Vietnam. He built the bookshelves himself. We planted the oak tree in the backyard when we moved in. Every inch of this place holds our history." Her eyes hardened. "That man, Mr. Harrington, he doesn't understand. He thinks everything has a price tag." Rachel nodded. "Mrs. Sullivan, Morgan Capital isn't going to stop. The Riverside project will proceed. That's a reality neither of us can change." She leaned forward. "But what if we could preserve what really matters? Not the physical house, but the legacy." Rachel pulled a proposal from her bag, not a legal document, but an idea she had drafted herself. "Riverside Towers is going to include a medical facility for residents. What if we renamed it the Robert Sullivan Memorial Health Center? We would install a bronze plaque honoring his service as a Marine, and we would establish the Sullivan Nursing Scholarship, providing full tuition for veterans studying nursing at Boston University." Mrs. Sullivan stared at her speechless. Tears welled in her sharp eyes. James had tried to buy her home. Rachel had offered her immortality. When Rachel returned to the Morgan Tower on Monday morning, she carried Mrs. Sullivan's signed agreement. The elderly woman had not only agreed to sell her property, but had also volunteered to speak at the opening ceremony of the health center named after her husband. Victor summoned both Rachel and James to his office. James arrived confident, clearly unaware of the development. "Sullivan signed," Rachel said, simply sliding the agreement across Victor's desk. James stared at the document in disbelief. "That's impossible. I offered her $2 million last week." "Ms. Carter didn't offer money," Victor said, reading through the agreement. "She offered meaning." He looked up at Rachel, a glint of approval in his eyes. "The Sullivan Health Center and Scholarship Program. Creative. And the construction delay ended with a public relations win." He turned to James. "And that's how you solve a problem, Harrington. Learn from it." The balance of power on the 78th floor had just shifted, and everyone knew it. As Rachel left Victor's office, she felt James's cold stare burning into her back. She had passed the first test, but she knew the real challenge was just beginning. James Harrington would not accept defeat graciously, and Victor Morgan would only demand more impressive results. That night, as Rachel administered Lily's evening treatment, she wondered if she had made the right choice. The salary would change their lives. Lily could enroll in the clinical trial at Boston Children's Hospital. They could move to a better apartment in a neighborhood with cleaner air. For the first time in years, Rachel could see a future that wasn't defined by the next medical bill. But she had also made a powerful enemy in James Harrington, and she served a master in Victor Morgan, whose loyalty extended only as far as her usefulness. She had entered a world where failure was not tolerated and second chances did not exist. As she looked at Lily breathing more easily after her treatment, Rachel knew it didn't matter. Whatever challenges lay ahead at Morgan Capital, she would face them. For her sister, for her own unfulfilled potential, and perhaps even for Victor Morgan, a man who seemed as broken in his own way as the desperate robbers who had changed her life. Rachel's success with Mrs. Sullivan created ripples throughout Morgan Capital. The whispers in the hallways changed from dismissive to curious. The employees who had initially avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully when she passed. Victor Morgan had noticed her potential, but now others were beginning to see it too. Everyone except James Harrington, whose resentment festered like an untreated wound. 3 weeks into her new role, Rachel had established a routine. She arrived at 7:30 each morning, an hour before most executives, using the quiet time to study the complex financial terminology that still felt like a foreign language. During lunch breaks, she video called Lily, whose condition had already improved thanks to the specialized care at Boston Children's Hospital. Evenings were spent in their new apartment in a quiet neighborhood with clean air and large windows that let in abundant sunlight. On this particular morning, Rachel stood in Victor's office as he reviewed her latest report. The silence was broken only by the occasional turning of pages. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston was bathed in early autumn light, the harbor glittering like scattered diamonds. This analysis of the labor situation at our Philadelphia manufacturing plant is thorough, Victor said, finally closing the file. You identified the real issue, not wages, but safety concerns and outdated equipment. He leaned back in his chair. Most executives would have thrown money at the problem. You found the actual disease instead of treating symptoms. Rachel nodded, still uncomfortable with praise. The foremen were surprisingly candid once they realized I was actually listening. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. You went to Philadelphia personally. That wasn't necessary. It was to me, Rachel replied. I can't assess a situation properly through spreadsheets and secondhand reports. A ghost of a smile touched Victor's lips. That's why I hired you. He gestured to a chair. Sit. There's a new situation requiring your attention. Rachel sat, notebook ready. Victor pressed a button on his desk and a wall panel slid open to reveal a large screen displaying a satellite view of Boston's waterfront. Morgan Capital recently acquired Hampshire Shipping, a port facility that handles 20% of the Northeast container traffic. The acquisition was smooth. The integration is not. Victor's voice hardened. The dock workers' union is threatening to strike. Their leader, Frank Donovan, has already chewed up and spat out 2 of our top negotiators. Rachel had read about Frank Donovan in the Boston business press, a third-generation union leader, with a reputation for being both principled and pugnacious. His grandfather had founded the union in the 1930s, fighting for basic safety measures after a dock collapse killed 12 workers. What are their demands? Rachel asked. On paper, the usual higher wages, better benefits. Victor stood and moved to the window. But there's something else. Donovan keeps talking about automation threats and preserving legacy. We need this resolved quickly and quietly. A prolonged strike would cost us millions and damage relationships with shipping clients. Rachel considered the situation. I'd like to meet with Donovan, not in a conference room here, but on his turf. Victor turned his expression skeptical. Donovan doesn't respond well to what he calls suits from downtown. Then I won't be a suit from downtown, Rachel said simply. I'll be someone who wants to understand his concerns. Victor studied her for a long moment. You have 3 days. Get it done. As Rachel left Victor's office, she nearly collided with James Harrington in the hallway. Unlike their previous encounters, he wore a smile that seemed almost genuine. Rachel, he said warmly, I hear you've been doing impressive work. The Sullivan situation was creative. Rachel kept her expression neutral, suspicious of this sudden change in attitude. Thank you, James. Actually, I was hoping to make amends for our rocky start. He gestured toward his office. Would you join me for a moment? I have some insights on the Hampshire shipping situation that might help. Wary but professional, Rachel followed him into his corner office, a space 3 times the size of hers, decorated with expensive art and framed Harvard diplomas. A large photograph showed a younger James shaking hands with a former president. Impressive credentials, Rachel remarked. Thank you. James settled behind his desk. I've been with Morgan Capital for 15 years. Started as an analyst right out of Harvard Business School. He leaned forward. Which is why I feel I should warn you about the Hampshire situation. Frank Donovan isn't just any union leader. He's practically union royalty. His family has led those docks for 3 generations. I've done my research, Rachel said. James nodded approvingly. Of course you have. But what the research won't tell you is that Victor has already decided on full automation for Hampshire within 2 years. The negotiations are just for show, a way to ease the transition and avoid bad publicity. Rachel kept her expression carefully neutral. That's not what Victor told me. James gave her a knowing smile. Victor doesn't tell anyone everything. It's how he operates. I'm just giving you a friendly heads up so you don't make promises to Donovan that Victor has no intention of keeping. I appreciate the information, Rachel said, rising to leave. If you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make. Back in her office, Rachel considered James's friendly warning. If Victor was indeed planning full automation regardless of negotiations, she was being set up to fail. But if James was lying to sabotage her efforts, walking into the meeting with Donovan, carrying that assumption would doom the talks before they began. She needed more information. Rather than approaching Victor directly, which might reveal her doubts, she decided to go straight to the source. That evening, instead of returning to her apartment, Rachel drove to South Boston to a dockside bar called The Anchor, that local guides described as a authentic union watering hole since 1948. The Anchor was exactly as advertised, a weathered establishment with a nautical theme that hadn't been updated in decades. The patrons were mostly men with the weathered look of those who worked at outdoors, their conversations punctuated by rough laughter and occasional bursts of profanity. Rachel entered wearing jeans and a simple sweater, having changed out of her Morgan Capital attire. She ordered a beer at the bar and quietly asked the bartender if Frank Donovan was around. The bartender gave her a suspicious once-over before nodding toward a corner booth. Frank Donovan matched his reputation, a bear of a man, in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and hands that looked capable of bending steel. He was holding court with several other men, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. Rachel approached the table, aware that conversation stopped as she drew near. Donovan looked up, his expression wary. "Frank Donovan," Rachel asked. "My name is Rachel Carter. I'm from Morgan Capital. I was hoping we might talk." A tense silence fell over the table. One of the younger men started to stand, his face darkening, but Donovan placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Morgan sent a girl," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "He getting soft." The question carried a challenge but also a hint of curiosity. Rachel met his gaze steadily. "He sent someone who prefers listening to talking. May I sit?" Donovan studied her for a long moment before gesturing to the empty seat across from him. The other men moved aside, creating space while watching with undisguised interest. "So what's Morgan's play?" Donovan asked once she was seated. "Higher wage offer, more threats about overseas shipping, or did he send you to soften me up with a pretty face?" "I'm here because our negotiators failed to understand what you actually want," Rachel said simply. "And I'm guessing it's not just about wages." Donovan's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "That's so. And what do you think I want, Miss Morgan Capital?" "First, I think you want respect for yourself, your workers, and your family's legacy on these docks." Rachel took a small sip of her beer. "Second, I think you are worried about automation replacing jobs that have supported generations of families in this neighborhood." The table had gone completely silent. Donovan's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes had narrowed slightly. "You've done your homework," he acknowledged. "But knowing the problem doesn't mean Morgan's willing to solve it." "That depends on whether we can find a solution that works for everyone," Rachel said. "I'm not here to make empty promises, Mr. Donovan. I'm here to understand the full picture before negotiations begin." Donovan leaned back, studying her with new interest. "You're not like the other suits Morgan sent." "I was a waitress until a month ago," Rachel said with a small smile. "The suit is new. The person inside it isn't a suit at all." For the first time, Donovan's stern expression cracked into something resembling a smile. "A waitress. Now that's interesting." He waved to the bartender. "Joe, another round for the table." He turned back to Rachel. "If you want the full picture, Miss Carter, I've got some stories to tell." Over the next 2 hours, Rachel listened as Donovan shared the history of the union, stories of his grandfather, standing up to shipping magnates during the depression of his father, expanding healthcare benefits in the 1970s, of his own battles to maintain wages as globalization pressured the industry. He spoke with pride of families who had worked the docks for 4 generations of the community that had formed around the shipping industry. These aren't just jobs, Donovan concluded, his voice softening. They're identities. When a man's father and grandfather work these docks, it's more than a paycheck. It's who they are. Rachel nodded. And automation threatens all of that. Damn right it does, Donovan said, passion flaring in his eyes. Those fancy cranes and robotic loaders Morgan wants to install, they'll cut the workforce by 70%. That's not progress, it's decimation. What if there was another way to look at it? Rachel asked carefully. Donovan's expression darkened. Here it comes, the corporate spin. Not spin, Rachel corrected, a different perspective. Automation is coming to shipping not just at Hampshire but globally. Fighting it entirely is like fighting the tide. But what if instead of replacing your workers, we retrain them? Donovan scoffed. To do what maintenance on the machines taking their jobs? That's part of it, Rachel acknowledged, but also system management, logistics, coordination, security oversight, jobs that pay better and don't break bodies the way loading cargo does. Most of my guys don't have college degrees, Donovan countered. They wouldn't need them. Morgan Capital would fund a state-of-the-art training facility right on site. Every current union member would be guaranteed a position in the new operation at equal or higher pay. No one gets left behind. Donovan studied her skeptically. And why would Morgan do that? It's cheaper to bring in college kids who already know the technology. Because trained, experienced workers who understand shipping operations are more valuable than new graduates who've never set foot on a dock, Rachel said. And because a public battle with a respected union leader whose family helped build this city would cost Morgan more in reputation than the training program would cost in dollars. A long silence followed as Donovan considered her words. Finally, he nodded slowly. Bring me that proposal in writing with Morgan's signature, and we can talk. He extended his hand. You're all right, waitress, but I'm still gonna be a hard ass at the negotiating table. Rachel smiled, shaking his massive hand. I wouldn't expect anything less, Mr. Donovan. And when Rachel presented her proposal to Victor the next morning, complete with a detailed plan for the training facility and transition program, he studied it in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at her. This would cost an additional $12 million over the first 3 years compared to a standard automation transition, and save at least $30 million in avoided strike costs, legal fees, and public relations damage control, Rachel countered. Plus, it transforms potential adversaries into partners and preserves institutional knowledge. Victor's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. You've come a long way from serving coffee at Tony's Diner, Miss Carter. The principles are the same, Rachel said. Understand what people really need, not just what they say they want. Victor signed the proposal without further comment. 3 days later, Frank Donovan and Victor Morgan shook hands at a press conference, announcing their innovative partnership for the future of Boston shipping. Industry analysts called it a model for labor relations in the automation age. The financial press praised Victor's strategic vision. No one mentioned the waitress who had made it possible, except James Harrington, who watched the press conference with cold fury. His friendly warning about Victor's intentions had been a deliberate attempt to sabotage Rachel's negotiations. Not only had she ignored his advice, but she had succeeded beyond expectations. In his office, James placed a call to his private investigator. Carson, I need you to dig deeper on Rachel Carter. There has to be something we can use. Everyone has secrets. I've tried all the usual channels, Carson replied. She's clean, no criminal record, good credit despite some medical debt, no compromising social media. The only unusual thing is how quickly she left nursing school when she was near the top of her class. Keep looking, James insisted. Focus on the sister Lily, and check for any connections to Victor before the diner incident. This can't be as coincidental as it appears. James hung up, his mind racing. Rachel Carter was becoming a genuine threat to his position. After 15 years of methodical climbing, he had been positioned as Victor's likely successor. Now this waitress with no qualifications was solving problems he couldn't and gaining Victor's trust in the process. It wasn't just professional jealousy driving James, though there was plenty of that. It was also the stark reminder of his own background. The Harvard degrees and tailored suits concealed a past not so different from Rachel's. James Harrington had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Pittsburgh, the son of a steel mill worker. His acceptance to Harvard on a scholarship had been his escape, and he had spent the subsequent decades burying that past beneath layers of acquired polish. Seeing Rachel rise so quickly triggered deep-seated insecurities he thought he had overcome long ago. If someone could ascend from waitress to executive in weeks, what did that say about his 15 years of calculated advancement? Meanwhile, Rachel's success continued. Over the next month, she resolved three more high-stakes situations: a contentious zoning dispute for a Morgan development in Chicago, a potential class-action lawsuit from tenants in a New York property, and a delicate negotiation with environmental activists protesting a Morgan-funded manufacturing plant. Each victory increased her confidence and expanded her understanding of the business world. She hired a private finance tutor who came to her apartment 3 evenings a week. She read voraciously about economics, real estate development, and corporate strategy. Most importantly, she applied her nursing training to the corporate environment, observing symptoms, diagnosing underlying conditions, and treating the root causes rather than surface problems. Victor began inviting her to high-level strategy meetings, often asking for her assessment of the executives presenting proposals. Rachel quickly realized he valued her ability to read people as much as her problem-solving skills. "Johnson is hiding something," she would murmur after a presentation. "He touched his wedding ring 4 times when discussing the projected timelines. They're not realistic, and he knows it." Or, "Williams believes in this project personally." Notice how she leans forward when describing the community impact, but reverts to corporate language when discussing ROI. She's passionate about the mission, but insecure about the financial projections. Victor rarely commented on these observations, but Rachel noticed he often adjusted his decisions accordingly. One Friday evening, as most employees were leaving for the weekend, Victor called Rachel into his office. Unlike their usual meetings, he wasn't seated behind his desk, but standing by the window gazing out at the city as dusk settled over Boston. "Do you know why I come to Tony's Diner once a month, Miss Carter?" he asked without turning around. The question caught Rachel off guard. "No, sir." "I met Eleanor there, my late wife. We were both 22. I had just left the Marines and was working 3 jobs while taking night classes. She was in medical school." A hint of warmth crept into his usually cold voice. "She used to study there because the coffee was cheap and they didn't mind if she stayed for hours." Rachel remained silent, sensing that interrupting would break whatever had prompted this rare personal disclosure. "After she died, I started going back on the anniversary of our first meeting. A foolish sentiment, perhaps." Victor turned from the window, his expression inscrutable. "I've been watching you closely, Miss Carter. You've exceeded my expectations." "Thank you," Rachel said simply, "which is why I'm assigning you to the Pioneer Health Initiative." Victor moved to his desk and handed her a thick folder. "This is potentially the most significant project Morgan Capital will undertake this year, a major investment in healthcare facilities across underserved communities." Rachel accepted the folder, surprised by the assignment. Healthcare investments were outside her usual purview of crisis management. "The board is divided on this initiative," Victor continued. "Some see it as a distraction from our core business. Others, including myself, see it as an opportunity to diversify our portfolio while addressing a critical market need." "Why me?" Rachel asked. "This seems more suited to your healthcare investment team." "Because this isn't just about numbers. It's about finding the right partner organization, one with both the medical expertise and the integrity to execute effectively." Victor's gaze sharpened. "James Harrington has been advocating strongly for an organization called Future Vision. I want you to vet them thoroughly. If they're as promising as James claims, we move forward. If not, we find an alternative." Rachel nodded, understanding the subtext. Victor trusted her judgment over James's, at least in this matter. "One more thing," Victor added as she turned to leave. "James doesn't know you're conducting this review. Let's keep it that way." The following week, Rachel divided her time between her regular duties and investigating Future Vision. On paper, the organization looked impressive, a rapidly growing healthcare nonprofit that established clinics in urban areas with limited medical services. Their brochures featured glossy photos of modern facilities and smiling patients. Their financial reports showed steady growth and seemingly efficient use of donor funds. James had scheduled a board presentation on the potential partnership for the following month with Future Vision's CEO, Dr. Amanda Richards, set to attend. Everything appeared in order, but something about the glossy perfection of their materials triggered Rachel's skepticism. Her nursing background had taught her to look beyond surface appearances. Rather than relying solely on the documents James had provided, Rachel decided to see Future Vision's work firsthand. She took a personal day and visited 3 of their Boston area clinics without announcing herself, simply walking in as if she were a potential patient. What she found disturbed her. The flagship clinic in Roxbury matched the brochure's modern, well-staffed, and busy with patients. But the 2 smaller clinics in Dorchester and East Boston were drastically different, sparsely equipped, understaffed, and offering only the most basic services despite being advertised as full-service health centers. At the East Boston location, Rachel struck up a conversation with a tired-looking nurse practitioner named Gloria. "How long have you been with Future Vision?" Rachel asked casually. "Almost 2 years," Gloria replied, "since they took over this clinic from Community Health Services." "Took over," Rachel prompted. Gloria lowered her voice. "Future Vision has been buying up smaller nonprofits across the city. They keep the flagship locations well-funded for publicity and donor visits, but the neighborhood clinics like this one get the bare minimum." "That must be frustrating," Rachel said. Gloria glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "It's worse than frustrating, it's dangerous. We're supposed to offer prenatal care according to the website, but we haven't had an ultrasound technician in 3 months. We refer patients to the Roxbury clinic, but many can't make the trip. I've filed reports with administration, but nothing changes." Rachel left the clinic with growing concern. Future Vision appeared to be prioritizing rapid expansion and marketing over patient care, precisely the opposite of what the Pioneer Health Initiative was intended to achieve. Back at her apartment that evening, Rachel began a deeper investigation into Future Vision's financials. The numbers James had presented showed a healthy organization with reasonable administrative costs. But when Rachel cross-referenced their tax filings with their annual reports, discrepancies emerged. A significant portion of their budget went to a consulting firm called Horizon Consulting for strategic development services. Rachel searched for information about Horizon Consulting and found little beyond a basic website and registration documents. It was as if the firm existed primarily on paper. To gain access to more detailed financial data, Rachel would need internal Morgan Capital resources. The next day, she submitted a formal request for the complete financial workup on Future Vision through the proper channels, which would route the request through the risk assessment department. As part of her due diligence, she also requested the background files on all analysts who had worked on the initial recommendation for the organization. 2 days later, an electronic file package arrived in her inbox. It contained the Future Vision analysis and the requested personnel files. She opened the personnel folder, first wanting to understand the team that had given this questionable charity a positive review. She scrolled through names and headshots of various analysts until she froze at one particular face. The name read Eric Collin, but what caught her attention was his striking resemblance to the second robber from Tony's Diner, the one who had worn the gray hoodie. The police had arrested his partner, identified as Kevin Miller, but the second suspect had escaped. Rachel's heart raced as she clicked on his file. Eric Collins worked in Morgan Capital's IT department with access to financial data systems. He had been hired 2 years ago with strong references and no criminal record. But as she read further, she discovered a notation from internal audit about a discrepancy in expense reporting for the Northwood Logistics deal 6 months ago. The report had been flagged and sent to the supervising executive, James Harrington, who had cleared Collins after a brief investigation. 2 days after being cleared, Eric Collins had wired $5,000 to a woman named Jessica Miller, Kevin Miller's girlfriend. The connection was unmistakable. Eric was Kevin's older brother, the second robber from Tony's Diner. Rachel dug deeper, searching for any connection between James and Future Vision. She found it buried in the contract details. Horizon Consulting, the mysterious firm receiving large payments from Future Vision, was registered to Melissa Warner, who was listed as James's girlfriend in a Society Page article from the Boston Globe 6 months earlier. The picture became frighteningly clear. James had covered up financial misconduct by Eric Collins, who was likely related to the diner robber. James was also pushing Morgan Capital to invest millions in Future Vision, which was funneling money to a company owned by his girlfriend. It wasn't just unethical, it was potentially criminal, but proving it would be difficult and dangerous. James Harrington wasn't just another executive. He was Victor's protege, a Harvard-educated power player with 15 years of connections throughout the company and the financial world. Rachel sat back from her computer, her mind racing. She had stumbled onto something much bigger and more dangerous than a questionable charity. The question was what to do with this information and whether Victor Morgan would believe a former waitress over his trusted lieutenant. As Rachel contemplated her next move, her phone rang. The screen displayed Victor Morgan's private number. "Ms. Carter," Victor said when she answered. "I need you in my office tomorrow morning at 7. James has moved up the Future Vision presentation. Dr. Richards will be attending." Rachel's breath caught. "I haven't completed my assessment yet." "Then I suggest you work through the night," Victor replied. "Because tomorrow the board votes on whether to commit $50 million to Pioneer Health with Future Vision as our primary partner." He paused. "Unless you have a reason we shouldn't." Rachel could hear the question in his statement. This was her opportunity. "I'll be prepared, Mr. Morgan," she promised. After hanging up, Rachel returned to her computer with renewed determination. She worked through the night compiling evidence, cross-referencing data, and building a case that could not be easily dismissed. By dawn, she had assembled a comprehensive presentation exposing both Future Vision's deceptive practices and James's conflicts of interest. As she finally closed her laptop, Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She was about to accuse one of Morgan Capital's top executives of serious misconduct. If she was wrong, her career would be over. If she was right, she had made a powerful enemy. Either way, there would be no going back. Rachel arrived at Morgan Tower at 6:30, giving herself time to prepare the boardroom for her counter-presentation. She had just finished setting up when James Harrington entered, followed by an elegant woman in her 40s, who Rachel assumed was Dr. Amanda Richards of Future Vision. "Rachel," James said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." "Victor asked me to attend," Rachel replied calmly. James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How nice. Dr. Richards, this is Rachel Carter, one of our newer executives." Dr. Richards extended a manicured hand. "Lovely to meet you, Ms. Carter. James has told me so much about the important work Morgan Capital is doing." Rachel shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch on Dr. Richards' wrist, a Cartier that cost more than most doctors made in a month. "I look forward to hearing about Future Vision's work as well." Other board members began arriving, taking their places around the large mahogany table. Victor entered last, nodding briefly to Rachel before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said without preamble. "James, you have the floor." James launched into a polished presentation highlighting Future Vision's rapid growth, innovative approach, in perfect alignment with the Pioneer Health Initiative. Dr. Richards followed with emotional anecdotes about patients whose lives had been transformed by Future Vision's services. The board members nodded appreciatively, clearly impressed. "Before we vote," Victor said when they had finished, "Ms. Carter has some additional information to share regarding this potential partnership." James's head snapped toward Rachel, confusion and the first flicker of concern crossing his face. Rachel stood and connected her laptop to the display system. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." She turned to face the board. "Over the past week, I've conducted an independent assessment of Future Vision as a potential partner for the Pioneer Health Initiative." She began methodically dismantling the rosy picture James and Dr. Richards had painted. She showed photographs of the understaffed clinics, presented testimony from frustrated medical providers, and highlighted the discrepancies in Future Vision's financial reporting. Most concerning, she continued, her voice steady despite James's increasingly hostile glare, is where Future Vision's money actually goes. Nearly 30% of their budget is directed to a consulting firm called Horizon Consulting. She displayed incorporation documents showing Melissa Warner as the owner. Ms. Warner is in a romantic relationship with Mr. Harrington, creating a significant conflict of interest that was not disclosed in his recommendation. The boardroom had gone completely silent. Dr. Richards's confident expression had transformed into barely concealed panic. James's face had drained of all color. "This is absurd," he finally sputtered. "My personal life has no bearing on Future Vision's qualifications." Victor raised a hand, silencing him. "Continue, Ms. Carter." Rachel took a deep breath. This conflict of interest is unfortunately not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of ethical lapses. She displayed Eric Collins's employee file alongside a police sketch of the second diner robber. This Morgan Capital employee was flagged for financial impropriety 6 months ago. Mr. Harrington cleared him despite evidence of misconduct. 2 days later, Collins wired money to a relative of the man who robbed Tony's diner, the incident where Mr. Morgan first observed my crisis management skills. The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. James looked as if he might lunge across the table at Rachel. "This is a smear campaign," he hissed. "My personal relationships are being weaponized. Is the financial information accurate?" Victor interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. James faltered. "The Horizon connection it's complicated. Yes or no, James?" The silence stretched painfully before James finally whispered, "Yes, but I can't explain." Victor stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned. The Pioneer Health vote is postponed. Dr. Richards, thank you for your time. James, my office, now." As the stunned board members filed out, Rachel began gathering her materials, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash following her presentation. Victor paused beside her. "My office after I'm done with Harrington," he said quietly. Then almost inaudibly, he added, "Well done." An hour later, Rachel sat in Victor's office as he gazed out the window, his back to her. The confrontation with James had concluded behind closed doors, but the security team escorting him from the building had told the whole story. "The head of the Pioneer Health Initiative is now vacant," Victor said, finally turning to face her. "I want you to take it." Rachel blinked in surprise. "Sir, I don't have the qualifications." "You have exactly the qualifications needed," Victor interrupted. "Integrity, judgment, the ability to see beneath surfaces. The rest can be learned." He sat behind his desk. "You will need to find us a legitimate healthcare partner and oversee the implementation of the initiative. It's a significant promotion with corresponding compensation." Rachel's mind raced. This wasn't just another assignment. It was a directorship, a permanent executive position far beyond anything she could have imagined a month ago. "Why me?" she asked. Victor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because you've proven you can't be bought, intimidated, or fooled. Because you risk your position to do what's right." He picked up a pen, signaling the decision was made. "The Pioneer Health Initiative needs someone with medical knowledge and ethical clarity. You have both. Do you accept?" In that moment, Rachel thought of Lily, how her sister's life had been transformed by access to quality health care. She thought of Gloria, the frustrated nurse practitioner trying to provide care with inadequate resources. She thought of her own interrupted journey to become a nurse. Perhaps this was a different path to the same destination, helping people when they were most vulnerable. "Yes," she said, "I accept." The news of James Harrington's dramatic departure spread through Morgan Capital like wildfire. By afternoon, the entire financial district of Boston buzzed with speculation. James had been a fixture in the company for 15 years, Victor Morgan's presumed successor. His sudden exit created a power vacuum that sent executives scrambling to realign alliances and position themselves for advancement. Rachel ignored the chaos, focusing instead on the monumental task before her. As the new director of the Pioneer Health Initiative, she had been entrusted with $50 million to transform healthcare access in underserved communities. It was an opportunity to combine her nursing background with her newly acquired business acumen and to prove that Victor's faith in her was justified. 3 days after James's departure, Rachel sat in her new office, no longer a glass fishbowl, but a spacious corner suite befitting her director status. The walls remained bare. She hadn't had time to personalize the space. Her desk was covered with reports on healthcare nonprofits, community health statistics, and proposals from potential partners. A knock at her open door interrupted her concentration. Victor Morgan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Walk with me," he said simply. Rachel followed him to the private elevator that served only the executive floor. They rode in silence to the lobby where Victor's driver waited with the Bentley. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked as they settled into the leather seats. "To see the consequences of our decisions," Victor replied cryptically. 20 minutes later, they pulled up before a weathered brick building in Dorchester, one of the Future Vision clinics Rachel had visited during her investigation. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Closed until further notice." Future vision is collapsing, Victor said, observing the shuttered clinic. After our board meeting, several major donors pulled their funding. Dr. Richards resigned yesterday. The organization will likely declare bankruptcy within the month. Rachel felt a pang of guilt. Those clinics provided services, however inadequate. Now people have nothing. Precisely why we're here. Victor nodded toward the building. This is the first property I want Pioneer Health to acquire. Reopen it properly, fully staffed and equipped. Rachel turned to him, surprised. You want to salvage Future Vision's network? I want to build something better on its ruins, Victor corrected. The locations were well-chosen areas with genuine need. The execution was corrupt. Fix it. The directive was classic Victor Morgan terse, demanding and allowing no possibility of failure. But Rachel detected something else in his voice, something almost like passion. This matters to you personally, she observed. Why, boy, Victor was silent for so long that Rachel thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Eleanor was an oncologist. She believed healthcare was a right, not a privilege. We argued about it constantly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She would have approved of Pioneer Health. The admission of vulnerability, however slight, was unprecedented. Rachel knew better than to acknowledge it directly. I'll make it work, she promised instead. I know you will. Victor turned his gaze back to the closed clinic. There's something else we need to discuss. The publicity surrounding James's departure has created complications. The press is digging. They'll find out about you soon, the waitress Victor Morgan plucked from obscurity who exposed his right-hand man. Rachel hadn't considered the media angle. That could undermine my credibility with potential healthcare partners. Or enhance it, Victor countered. Depends on how the story's told. So we control the narrative, Rachel said, thinking aloud. Get ahead of it. Victor nodded approvingly. There's a journalist, Diane Powell, from the Boston Chronicle. She's tenacious but fair. I've arranged an interview for you tomorrow. Tell her about your background, your sister, your interrupted nursing career. Make it about healthcare, not corporate intrigue. As they returned to the Bentley, Rachel realized Victor was coaching her on public relations, a skill she would need in her new role. Once again, he was preparing her for challenges she hadn't yet anticipated. The next morning, Rachel met with Diane Powell at a quiet cafe near Morgan Tower. The journalist was in her 50s, with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses and a notebook rather than a digital recorder. So, Powell began, after introductions, the waitress who became an executive. It's quite a story. Rachel smiled. It sounds like a fairy tale when you put it that way. The reality was more complicated. Tell me about the reality then, Powell said, pen poised. Rachel shared her story growing up with parents in healthcare, her nursing education interrupted by tragedy caring for Lily while working at Tony's diner. She described the robbery without dramatizing it, emphasizing how her nursing training had helped her manage the crisis. Victor Morgan recognized skills I developed in healthcare assessment triage communication under pressure, Rachel explained. Those same skills helped me identify problems with the Future Vision partnership. And expose James Harrington, Powell noted. That took courage. He was a powerful figure at Morgan Capital. It wasn't about James, Rachel insisted. It was about protecting a vital initiative. Pioneer Health will provide quality healthcare to communities that desperately need it. That's the real story here. Powell studied her thoughtfully. You genuinely care about this, don't you? It's not just corporate positioning. My sister nearly died because we couldn't afford specialized care when she was first diagnosed, Rachel said quietly. No family should face that choice. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. Powell asked pointed questions about Victor, about Rachel's rapid rise, about her qualifications. Rachel answered honestly but kept returning to the mission of Pioneer Health. 3 days later, the Boston Chronicle published the article, From Waitress to Healthcare Pioneer, the Woman Transforming Morgan Capital. The piece portrayed Rachel as a healthcare advocate who had found an unexpected path to make a difference. It touched on James's departure, but focused primarily on the clinic's Pioneer Health plan to establish. The story was picked up by national outlets, portraying Rachel's journey as inspirational rather than scandalous. Victor was pleased. Well done, he said, dropping the newspaper on Rachel's desk. The phones are ringing with potential healthcare partners wanting to meet you. Rachel nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The morning's mail had included an envelope addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a brief note. "We need to talk. This isn't over. Michael Morgan." Victor's estranged son had contacted her directly, a development she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure how to handle. Should she tell Victor immediately, speak with Michael first? Ignore the communication entirely before she could decide? Her assistant interrupted. "Ms. Carter, there's an Eric Collins here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent." Rachel tensed. Eric Collins, the IT specialist connected to the diner robbery, the man James had protected. "What could he want?" "Send him in," she said, pressing the silent security alert button Victor had installed beneath her desk. Eric Collins was younger than Rachel had expected, mid-20s, with the same nervous energy she had observed in the hooded robber at the diner. His eyes darted around her office, never settling in one place. "Mr. Collins," Rachel said calmly, "what can I do for you?" "You got it wrong," he blurted, hands fidgeting, "about me and James and all of it." Rachel maintained her composure. "Perhaps you should clarify what I got wrong." "James wasn't protecting me," Eric said, his words tumbling out rapidly. "He was blackmailing me. He found out about my brother Kevin's record, threatened to expose me if I didn't help him access financial data he shouldn't have seen." Rachel assessed his body language, the tension in his shoulders, the way he couldn't meet her eyes directly. He was terrified, but she sensed he was telling the truth. "Why come to me with this?" she asked. "Because it's bigger than you think," Eric said, lowering his voice. "James has been gathering information on Victor for years, personal stuff, business decisions, everything. He's working with someone outside the company. They wanted to force Victor out." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" Eric glanced nervously at the door. "Michael Morgan." The revelation struck Rachel like a physical blow. Michael Morgan, Victor's estranged son, who had just contacted her, was allegedly conspiring with James Harrington against his own father. "That's a serious accusation," she said carefully. "Do you have proof?" Eric nodded. "That's why I'm here. I made copies of their emails, recorded conversations when James thought I was just IT support. I kept it as insurance, but now I just want out. Take it all." He placed a flash drive on her desk. "I never meant for Kevin to rob that diner. James was squeezing me for money, and Kevin thought he was helping by getting cash another way." Rachel picked up the flash drive, considering her options. If Eric was telling the truth, she was holding evidence of a conspiracy against Victor Morgan. If he was lying, this could be an elaborate trap set by James to discredit her. "Why should I believe you?" she asked directly. "Because I'm terrified," Eric admitted, his voice breaking. "James called me last night. He said things aren't over, that I need to stick to the story or else, but I can't do this anymore." The fear in his eyes seemed genuine. Rachel made a decision. "Wait here," she instructed, then stepped outside to speak with her assistant. "Call security. Have them escort Mr. Collins to conference room B and stay with him. Then get Victor Morgan on the line immediately." Within the hour, Victor arrived at the conference room where Eric Collins waited under security supervision. Rachel briefed him on Eric's claims and handed him the flash drive. "This could be disinformation," she cautioned, "a ploy by James to create discord." Victor's face remained impassive, but Rachel noticed his hand tighten around the flash drive. "Or it could be true. Michael and James were close before—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Have it verify the authenticity of these files. Keep Collins isolated until we know more." As Victor turned to leave, Rachel took a deep breath. "There's one more thing. I received a note from Michael this morning. He wants to meet." Victor froze. For a moment, Rachel thought she had made a terrible mistake in revealing this information. When Victor finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Rachel said. "I came to you first." Victor seemed to relax marginally. "Good. When Michael contacts you again, and he will agree to meet. But tell me first. I want to know what my son is planning." Over the next 2 days, Rachel threw herself into Pioneer Health work, trying to distract herself from the Michael Morgan situation. She identified 3 potential healthcare partners to replace Future Vision and began the process of acquiring the shuttered clinics. On the 3rd morning, another note arrived from Michael: "Fairmont Hotel Bar, 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. This concerns both my father and your sister." The mention of Lily sent a surge of protective fury through Rachel. How dare he imply a threat to her sister? She immediately called Victor. "He's trying to rattle you," Victor said after she read him the note. "Michael can be manipulative when he wants something. Meet him. Find out what he's after. I'll have security nearby. That evening, Rachel entered the elegant bar of the Fairmont Hotel precisely at 8. She spotted Michael immediately. He had his father's height and commanding presence, though his dark hair showed no signs of silver, despite him being in his mid-30s. He stood as she approached his corner table. "Rachel Carter," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm Michael Morgan." Rachel shook his hand briefly. "Your note mentioned my sister. I want to be clear that if that was meant as a threat—" "It wasn't," Michael interrupted, gesturing for her to sit. "It was meant to underscore the personal nature of what I need to discuss. I would never threaten a child." Rachel remained wary as she took a seat. "Then what exactly do you want from me, Mr. Morgan?" Michael studied her with eyes remarkably like his father's. "I want to know if you're just another one of my father's tools, or if you actually care about what Morgan Capital does in the world." "That's a false dichotomy," Rachel replied. "I can respect your father and still have my own ethical standards." A small smile touched Michael's lips. "Fair enough. Then let me be direct. James Harrington contacted me after his dismissal. He claims my father is using Pioneer Health as a public relations shield while continuing environmentally destructive practices elsewhere. He wanted my help to expose this." "And you believed him?" Rachel asked skeptically. "I know my father," Michael said, his voice hardening. "I left Morgan Capital 3 years ago because he refused to consider sustainable investments. He called them feel-good projects with subpar returns. Is Pioneer Health any different?" Rachel considered her answer carefully. "I can only speak to what I've seen. The Pioneer Health Initiative has Victor's full support financially and personally. He mentioned that your mother would have approved of it." Something flickered in Michael's eyes at the mention of his mother. "He used her name." Rachel nodded. "He said she believed healthcare was a right, not a privilege." Michael fell silent, seemingly processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. "What James didn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that I've been working on healthcare access issues myself these past 3 years. My nonprofit Greenlight Medical provides mobile clinics to rural communities." Rachel's professional interest was immediately piqued. "Mobile clinics? That's actually something Pioneer Health is looking to incorporate." Michael leaned forward, his expression softening. "That's why I wanted to meet you. When I read about your background nursing, caring for your sister, I thought perhaps you were different from my father's usual executives, that maybe Pioneer Health was genuine." "It is," Rachel assured him, "but I'm confused. If you care about healthcare access, why would you work with James to undermine Pioneer Health?" "I wasn't," Michael said firmly. "James approached me, but I was suspicious of his motives from the start. I've been gathering evidence of his activities for weeks." He removed a folder from his briefcase. "James wasn't just embezzling through future vision. He was actively sabotaging my father's legitimate projects to force a leadership crisis." Rachel accepted the folder cautiously. "Why bring this to me instead of directly to your father?" Michael's face clouded. "My father and I haven't spoken in 3 years. Our last conversation ended with him telling me I was too idealistic to survive in business. Some wounds don't heal easily." Rachel understood family estrangement all too well. After her parents died, she had distanced herself from her aunt, who had suggested institutionalizing Lily to ease the financial burden. "Your father misses you," she said quietly. "He doesn't say it, but I can tell." Michael scoffed. "Victor Morgan doesn't miss people. He assesses their utility." "That's not entirely true," Rachel countered. "He goes to Tony's Diner monthly to feel close to your mother. He keeps her photo on his desk. He's capable of sentiment, even if he hides it well." Michael stared at her, genuine surprise crossing his features. "You really don't fear him, do you?" "I respect him," Rachel corrected. "Fear would make me less effective at my job." Michael smiled, a real smile this time. "You sound like my mother." He closed his briefcase. "I have a proposal. Greenlight Medical has developed an efficient model for mobile healthcare delivery. Pioneer Health has the capital to scale it nationally. We should be partners, not adversaries." Rachel considered the proposal. A partnership with Michael's organization made strategic sense. His mobile clinics would complement Pioneer Health's fixed facilities. More importantly, it might offer a path to reconciliation between father and son. "I'd need to see Greenlight's operational data financials outcomes." "Of course," Michael interrupted. Full transparency. Unlike Future Vision, we have nothing to hide. Rachel nodded. Then I'll review your materials and discuss it with the Pioneer Health team. She hesitated before adding, and with your father. Michael tensed visibly. Victor doesn't need to be involved in the preliminary discussions. He's the chairman of Morgan Capital, Rachel reminded him. Any major partnership requires his approval eventually. I'm not ready to face him. Michael admitted vulnerability breaking through his confident facade. Not yet. Rachel made a decision. What if I arranged a neutral meeting, not as Morgan Capital and Greenlight Medical, but as father and son before any business discussions? Michael studied her skeptically. And why would you do that? Because Pioneer Health will be stronger with both your contributions, Rachel said honestly, and because I've seen what happens when family rifts go unhealed. After a long moment, Michael nodded slowly. I'll consider it. Send me the Pioneer Health Partnership criteria. If there's a genuine fit, perhaps we can discuss the other matter. As Rachel left the hotel, she called Victor, who had been waiting for her report. She summarized the conversation, including Michael's revelation about Greenlight Medical and the potential partnership. He seems sincere, she concluded, and his mobile clinic model could be valuable to Pioneer Health. Victor was silent for several beats. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar uncertainty. How did he seem? The question caught Rachel off guard with its emotional underpinning. He seems well, passionate about his work, and he has your stubbornness. A soft chuckle came through the phone the first time Rachel had ever heard Victor laugh. Eleanor always said he got the worst of both of us. He's considering a meeting with you, Rachel added gently. Not about business, just father and son. Another long silence followed. Set it up, Victor said finally. Somewhere private. And Rachel, thank you. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Rachel reviewed Greenlight Medical's materials and was impressed by their operational efficiency and genuine impact. She visited one of their mobile clinics and witnessed firsthand the quality of care they provided. Simultaneously, she advanced the acquisition of former Future Vision properties and began recruiting healthcare professionals. Throughout it all, she worked on the most delicate negotiation of her career, arranging a reconciliation between Victor and Michael Morgan. Both men were proud, stubborn, and wounded by their 3-year estrangement. Neither would admit to needing the other, yet both circled warily around the possibility of reunion. Rachel chose the meeting location carefully. Eleanor Morgan's favorite restaurant, a small Italian place in the North End. She arranged for a private room and personally confirmed the security arrangements. On the designated evening, Rachel arrived early to ensure everything was perfect. Victor arrived next, uncharacteristically hesitant as he entered the private dining room. He might not come, Victor said, adjusting his tie, a nervous gesture Rachel had never observed in him before. He'll come, Rachel assured him. He wants this as much as you do, even if neither of you will admit it. When Michael arrived 10 minutes later, the tension in the room became almost palpable. Father and son stood facing each other, separated by 3 years of silence and a lifetime of complicated emotions. Michael, Victor said, his voice unsteady. Dad, Michael replied, equally uncertain. Rachel moved toward the door. I'll leave you two to talk. No, both men said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Stay, Victor added. You made this happen. You should see it through. Rachel remained taking a seat at the far end of the table as father and son began the difficult work of reconciliation. The conversation was awkward at first, stilted pleasantries and cautious questions, but as they shared a meal that had been Eleanor's favorite, the formality gradually gave way to genuine dialogue. Michael spoke about leaving Morgan Capital, about building Greenlight Medical from nothing, about wanting to honor his mother's memory through healthcare work. Victor in turn revealed his regret over their argument, his pride in Michael's accomplishments, his recent reevaluation of Morgan Capital's priorities. Pioneer Health isn't just PR, Victor insisted. It's a course correction. Inspired by a waitress who stood up to you, Michael noted, with a small smile toward Rachel. Victor nodded. Sometimes we need outsiders to help us see clearly. As the evening progressed, Rachel witnessed something remarkable, the thawing of a frozen relationship, the tentative rebuilding of trust. There were still painful moments, old wounds reopened, accusations of past failings. But beneath it all was a current of connection, the unmistakable bond between father and son. Near the end of the meal, Michael broached the subject of partnership. Greenlight Medical and Pioneer Health should work together. Our missions align, and together we could help more people than either of us could alone. Victor considered this. A formal partnership would require board approval. There would be scrutiny questions about nepotism. Then we create a structure that addresses those concerns, Rachel suggested. Independent oversight, transparent metrics, clear division of responsibilities. Both men turned to look at her, the outsider who had somehow become essential to their reconciliation. In that moment, Rachel realized she had gained something precious, the trust of two exceptionally guarded individuals. Morgan Greenlight Initiative, Victor proposed. Equal partnership between Morgan Capital and Greenlight Medical with Rachel as executive director. Michael raised his eyebrows. You'd cede control of Pioneer Health to qualified partners with shared values. Victor nodded. Eleanor would have insisted on it. As the three continued their discussion late into the night, sketching out a vision for what the Morgan Greenlight Initiative could become, not just clinics in underserved urban areas, but a comprehensive approach to healthcare access across the country. As they finally prepared to leave, Michael extended his hand to his father. Victor looked at it for a moment, then pulled his son into an embrace instead. Rachel discreetly stepped aside to give them privacy for this moment of reconciliation. When they emerged, both men looked emotionally drained but lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Thank you, Rachel, Michael said sincerely, for everything. Victor simply nodded, but his eyes conveyed what he couldn't express in words. 1 month later, Rachel stood at the podium for the official launch of the Morgan Greenlight Initiative. Behind her sat Victor and Michael, father and son, presenting a united front for the first time in years. Before her stretched rows of journalists, healthcare professionals, and community representatives. Healthcare isn't just about medicine, Rachel began. It's about dignity, about seeing people at their most vulnerable and responding with compassion and competence. That's what the Morgan Greenlight Initiative represents, a commitment to serving communities that have been overlooked for too long. As she outlined their plans for the next 5 years, 20 new fixed clinics, 30 mobile units, training programs for community health workers. Rachel caught sight of Lily in the audience, beaming with pride. Her sister's health had stabilized thanks to the clinical trial, her future brighter than they had dared hope a year ago. From waitress to healthcare executive, from crisis management to community building. Rachel's journey had been extraordinary. Yet the principles that guided her remained the same: assess the situation, identify the real problem, and act with both compassion and competence. After the presentation, as the attendees mingled during the reception, Victor approached her with an unusual request. Come with me tomorrow morning, he said. There's somewhere I'd like to take you. The next day, Victor's Bentley pulled up in front of Tony's diner. Rachel smiled at the symmetry, returning to where it all began. Inside the diner was exactly as she remembered it: the red vinyl booths, the scent of coffee and bacon, the cheerful chaos of the breakfast rush. Victor led her to the corner booth, his regular spot. Tony himself approached with coffee, his eyes widening in recognition. Rachel and Mr. Morgan, what a surprise! They placed their orders, and when Tony departed, Victor turned to Rachel with uncharacteristic uncertainty. I've been thinking about legacy lately, he said, stirring his coffee absently. About what we leave behind. Eleanor left compassion. I built wealth, but sacrificed relationships. You brought them back together. Rachel shook her head. You and Michael did the hard work yourselves. After you created the opportunity, Victor insisted, few people would have had the courage to confront James, the insight to see beyond Michael's anger, or the skill to bring us together. He pushed a folder across the table. Which is why I'm offering you this. Rachel opened the folder to find legal documents establishing a new entity, the Eleanor Morgan Foundation, with Rachel Carter listed as executive director, and a staggering endowment of $1 billion. This is, she began, unable to find adequate words. A platform, Victor completed, independent of Morgan Capital, focused exclusively on healthcare innovation and access, overseen by you, Michael, and myself as a board of trustees. Rachel stared at the documents, overwhelmed by their implications. Why me? Victor's eyes, usually so guarded, held a rare warmth. Because second chances are precious, Ms. Carter. You gave one to Michael and me. You deserved one after your nursing career was interrupted. This foundation will give second chances to thousands of others. As Rachel considered Victor's offer, she gazed around the diner where her life had changed course so dramatically. She thought about the frightened waitress she had been facing down armed robbers with nothing but composure and quick thinking. She thought about Lily, about the patients she might have served as a nurse, about the communities the foundation could help. I accept, she said, extending her hand across the table. On one condition. Victor raised an eyebrow. Which is, that you recognize this isn't charity or sentimentality, Rachel said firmly. It's the best strategic investment you've ever made. Victor Morgan Billionaire, feared corporate raider, recently reunited. Father actually smiled as he shook her hand. On that, Ms. Carter, we are in complete agreement. Outside Tony's diner, Boston continued its relentless pace. But inside the corner booth, something remarkable had taken form. Not just a foundation, but a recognition that true valor often comes in the most unexpected moments, and that second chances, when seized with both hands, can change not just one life, but countless others.